It is the end of an era. Can I get an F for the New York Autonomous Zone? That's right, the NYPD in a pre-dawn raid cleared out Occupy City Hall. They were demanding that the NYPD be defunded, and they won and then stayed, I guess. They defunded the NYPD to the tune of $1 billion, resulting in activists in New York demanding the police be refunded, which I find kind of funny because when I first saw the slogan, refund the NYPD, I didn't understand what it meant. Like, give them their money back for their purchase. So it means reinstate the funding that was taken away. The New York Times spares no words. Officers in riot gear cleared the makeshift camp in City Hall Park, which began as a protest against police abuses, but then turned into a gathering of homeless people. Okay, I'd like to issue a correction for the New York Times. It was always a gathering of homeless people. And I'm not saying that to be funny or to be disrespectful. Whenever these activists try and set up any kind of occupation, you immediately get homeless people who come in. And it's not homeless people like you think, where it's literally just like some old dude with a beard who's like pushing a shopping cart full of tin cans. It's actually young homeless people too. Seeing the opportunity for resources and many of them being activists, they show up. I know this because I've been to many occupations around the country, notably Occupy Wall Street, which it did become a gathering of homeless people. Now, I'm sure the activists will take offense to that. But let's talk about the accomplishments, police abuses, and the pre-dawn raid by the NYPD. Like I said, let me get an F. I'm kidding. Police officers in riot gear cleared out, pour one out for the autonomous zone. Okay, I'm done. Police officers in riot gear cleared out the Occupy City Hall encampment in City Hall Park near dawn on Wednesday, shutting down a month-long demonstration against police brutality that recently had attracted numerous homeless. Why is homeless people highlight what they Occupy City Hall homeless? Oh, they actually have like a story about the problem of the homeless encampment. Oh, look at this. Oh, I'm not going to log in, so let's just read. A phalanx of officers in helmets started closing in on dozens of protesters and homeless people shortly before 4 a.m., moving in lockstep behind a wall of plastic shields, according to protesters and videos posted on social media. 7 people were arrested after sporadic clashes erupted between officers and residents of the camp. As the police moved through the camp, officers took down a series of tarps and makeshift tents that demonstrators and several homeless people had been living in and tossed them into city garbage trucks. By 8 a.m., city cleaning crews had arrived to scrub graffiti from the walls of several buildings in the area. A similar raid was launched almost a decade ago to dismantle the Occupy Wall Street camp in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. In November 2011, dozens of officers marched into the park at 1 a.m., rousting protesters who had been there since September and removing their tents, tarps, and belongings. You can see this photo here. They say the scene at City Hall Park in early July, where protesters set up an encampment, blah, blah. On Wednesday, Yesenia Benitez, 29, of Harlem, said she saw about 100 officers converge on City Hall Park well before sunrise, announcing to protesters and the homeless that they were breaking the law and ordering them to leave at once. Most people dispersed, she said, but a small group watched the police operation from Foley Square a few blocks to the north. A few protesters said the police had told them that they would be able to return to the park to retrieve their belongings. But when they went back, everything, their water, clothing, and personal effects, had been tossed into sanitation trucks, they said. The occupation began on June 23rd, when about 100 people set up a camp on a small patch of grass on the east of City Hall, with the mission of bringing pressure on the city council to cut New York City's funding at an upcoming vote before the July 1st budget deadline. Within a week, a small squatters colony grew into a ramshackle community, ramshackle, excellent choice of words, with food service, a hand sanitizing station, and even a library where campers could go to hear lectures on mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. Hundreds slept in the park each night, festooning benches and fences with signs decrying racism and police brutality. The plaza's sidewalks became a kind of horizontal gallery of protest art. They say they reached their peak in June 30th, when thousands crowded into the plaza after dark to watch the council vote on a giant video screen. Well, the council immediately decided to shift nearly $1 billion away from the police. Many of the protesters expressed disappointment, wanting deeper cuts, notably Miss Ocasio-Cortez, who said $1 billion doesn't go far enough. We want more. Well, since then, as I've mentioned, we've actually seen community organizers in marginalized communities demanding the police be reinstated, Crime is skyrocketing. So let me give you a round of applause to all of the people who occupied this place, got the city to defund the police, and now you're seeing what's like 200 or 300% increase in shooting, some ridiculous number from last year. Yeah, violent crime is actually down. Petty crime is down, but murders and shootings have gone up. Specifically because the unit that dealt, the anti-crime unit, was totally reassigned amid this budget shift. So congratulations, you've earned it. Now let me get to the bigger picture here. While we can lament the loss of our good friends over at the NYC Chaz, or I guess NYAZ, the New York Autonomous Zone, there's one thing I can say. If we have learned anything from these protests, it's that there's not going to be police reform in the direction they want. Police powers are actually kind of expanding. I mean, well, not necessarily, but I'll put it this way. Right now in New York, people are demanding the police back. Sentiment is, give us back our police. In other places, the police are actually taking a heavy-handed approach and arresting people, charging them with crimes, and in the instance of Missouri, charging people with crimes that they literally didn't commit, which we'll get to. I want to segue into this the whole point of this camp was police reform. Except these protests in other parts of the country have resulted in the inverse, where the police have gone overboard and it's actually gotten worse. So I'll tell you this. What have we earned from these glorious autonomous zone protests? We've earned cities moving money. That's about it. Crime has skyrocketed. We've earned that. Yes, some police have been defunded and things got worse. And in some places like St. Louis, they're actually enforcing laws that don't quite exist. And we're seeing the rise of morality policing. So congratulations. You've accomplished nothing other than destabilizing everything and creating a homeless camp. They say this week, Mr. de Blasio said in response to questions by reporters that he would let police officials decide when to shut down the encampment. Neither the police nor officials at City Hall immediately responded. I don't care. Though the occupation at City Hall was over, some protesters said it was not a fatal blow to their cause. It's a reminder that the fight isn't over. And you know what? I'm glad that they reminded us now, said Game Quinones, 22, who worked at the camp as a volunteer de-escalator, settling disputes and soothing frayed tempers. We'll go somewhere else with everything that we learned here and continue our work. Please, no. Like everything's getting worse. Man. I don't live in New York anymore, and I feel bad for the community leaders and activists who have to deal with all of this, who have to deal with the surge in Occupy City Hall struggles as homeless move in. Organizers said they were helping vulnerable people, but nearby residents said the camp had turned into an unruly and at times violent shanty town. That's all you've done. Now, look, I can respect the passion, the sentiment. We want to fix these problems. And you know what really bothers me? When you know that saying, when you make peaceful, revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable or whatever. I think it's fair to say that there are problems with the NYPD and many other police departments. And because the reforms weren't getting done, you end up with chaos and shanty towns. You end up with a dramatic escalation in crime and nobody is happy. Perhaps what we need to do is have legitimate reform conversations and actually talk with members of the community and make sure our police are treating people like their own neighbors. It's one of the biggest problems. Now, I don't know how New York solves that problem because New York is just too big. Nobody knows each other. Millions of people ride the subway and they never talk to each other once. So how you solve this impersonal, emotionless policing, I don't even know if it's possible. I'll tell you this, though. A bunch of random people going out, showing up and taking over spaces didn't do anything but make everything worse. I want to shift gears now and talk about the other side of this coin. So with this, you see lawlessness, right? You're like, we want to defund the police. Congratulations, you've won. And now almost a month later, you still had this encampment and they've wiped it out. Like I mentioned, crime is skyrocketing in New York, but there is an inverse to this. What happens if a large group of people go around marching through the streets demanding police reform and you get the opposite, over-enforcement? I bring you now to a story from a couple days ago of the McCloskeys. Now, this you probably already know about, but I want to highlight a statement made by the Attorney General in defense of the McCloskeys because the laws in Missouri are actually really, really interesting. But first, let's talk about this. Felony charges filed against St. Louis couple who pointed guns at protesters. It is illegal to wave weapons in a threatening manner. A prosecutor in the city said, I almost said New York, but in St. Louis. Here's why I bring these up and put them together. I see these leftist activists on Facebook, and they're talking about this story in particular. And can you guess what their response is? Their response is, yay, the police are arresting more people. Woohoo! Wait a minute. I thought you wanted police reform. No, I think it's fair to say that just because you want less policing in certain areas doesn't mean you're talking specifically about, someone brandishing a weapon. I do think it's funny that we're seeing record gun sales, and now you've got the left protesting against guns. It just doesn't even make sense. Well, it's because they came out and brandished them. We demand they be arrested. No, the reality is everything they've been doing is about ideological gains. That's it. And that's the point of how this overlaps. The two sides of the coin. Ideological victory. They want to defund the police, not because they don't want police, because they want to presumably replace it with their version of morality police, like we'll probably start seeing in Minneapolis. They disbanded their police department. What happens then? You're going to get intersectionalist police or whatever, some stupid nonsense, or at the very least you get none. But that helps. It helps them tear down the system. In St. Louis, what are they demanding? Ideological victory. Arrest these people who dared to oppose us. That's what we're getting. The McCloskeys did nothing wrong. That's a fact. The AG says so. The governor is talking about pardoning them. So why are left-wing activists cheering for felony charges for people who are on their own property defending themselves? It's because they were defending themselves from a mob of people who they ideologically oppose. It's because the mob of people opposes them, and they want to wield the power of the state against their enemies. That's what it's all about. Defund the police. You know what, man? They'll whisper sweet nothings into your ears, and they will tell you, we want peace. We want reform. We want justice and equality for all except them. That's what the activists tell me. You realize that Trump wants to harm people, but that way he can he can benefit only the privileged elites. And I'm like, sure, maybe. But to act like these people aren't doing the same thing is absurd. So you want to criticize them? I'll point it right back at you and say, what about this? These people were in their home, and I'll just call it a group. The people came onto private property, and they had weapons and said, GTFO. Guess what? Completely legal. In fact, the attorney general made this huge thread breaking down why it is. And I hope they uphold this. We'll see how it plays out. The AG has announced that he's moving to dismiss these charges. This is the optimistic side of things. This is the good news. All right. We can all be a little sad. We can pour one out for our friends over at the New York Chaz, the homeless, I guess now is a homeless encampment. I'm kidding, by the way. I'm sure most people don't actually care. Even the protesters don't care because they won and left. But it's not all bad. Because even though these people are trying to erode everything, they're infecting, many facets of government, and their fringe ideology makes no sense, we are still seeing some resistance from those in government. Notably, Eric Schmidt, who's the attorney general for Missouri, who breaks down in a really fascinating thread just why what the McCloskeys did was legal. If this is true, that what they did was completely legal, and the AG says it was, why would anyone cheer for over-policing? Let's step back for a second. I mentioned how the leftists want an ideological victory. This is overt. I mean, this is in our faces. They're literally saying, these people broke no laws, don't care, lock them up. Whoa. We want less policing, right? We want less people falsely accused of crimes or arrested for crimes they didn't commit. Nope, apparently not. Apparently the left is happy with innocent people who broke no laws getting arrested because they don't like them. So don't give them the reins. Heaven help us if those people get power, the weird lefty insurrectionist types. Let me read you some of this, because this is truly fascinating. Eric Schmidt says, St. Louis prosecutor Kim Gardner is engaged in a political prosecution. I entered the case seeking a dismissal. As AG, I have a duty to protect the fundamental rights of all Missourians, including the right to keep and bear arms in self-defense of one's person and home. A thread. Let me stop right there. If it is true that Kim Gardner is engaged in a political prosecution, dare I say malicious prosecution? Dare I add, sue the city? Sue the prosecutor's office? McCloskeys? I mean, they're lawyers. I'm pretty sure they're civil rights lawyers. Let's see how this one plays out. Here's what he says. This is fascinating. The right to defend one's person, family, and home and property has deep roots in Missouri. Self-defense is the central component of the right to keep and bear arms, which receives the highest protection from the Missouri Constitution. Missouri statutes specifically authorize citizens to use firearms to deter assailants and protect themselves, their families, and homes from threatening or violent intruders. A highly publicized criminal prosecution of citizens for exercising these fundamental freedoms threatens to intimidate and deter law-abiding citizens from exercising their constitutional right of self-defense. The prosecution sends a powerful message to all Missourians that they exercise their fundamental right to self-defense at their peril. Missourians should not fear exposure to criminal prosecution, even prison time, when they use firearms to defend themselves and their homes. Now, right away, I can see all the leftists saying they weren't defending their homes. Nobody was threatening. Irrelevant. I bring you now the continuation of the thread. He says, I have a duty to protect and defend the Constitution and statutory rights, constitutional and statutory rights of Missourians, including the constitutional right to keep and bear arms and the right to self-defense by way of our Constitution and Missouri's Castle Doctrine. I have entered the case and filed a brief seeking a dismissal of the case to ensure all Missourians who wish to exercise their fundamental right to defend themselves, their families, and their homes without fear of criminal prosecution. This case is extraordinary. Based on widely reported facts, this prosecution targets conduct explicitly protected by both the Missouri Constitution and statutes setting forth the Castle Doctrine of self-defense. In other words, this is not just a case of the government retaliating against a citizen for exercising a right, which is bad enough. It's also a case where the local prosecutor believes that exercising that right is itself a crime. My point, okay, is that when the protesters in New York or Chaz or anywhere else claim defund the police, they don't want to do that. They will wield the power of the state as they see fit. This is the problem of authoritarianism rising on the left. There's no fascist movement here. It doesn't exist. These people are insane. They want to get rid of the police and then use the police to enforce things the way they want them. Morality policing. That's the big issue at play. The political prosecution is not based in law, and as long as it continues, it will send a public message to all Missourians. If you dare to exercise the fundamental right to keep and bear arms in defense of your family and home, you may be prosecuted and sent to prison. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He says, the right to keep and bear arms in self-defense of one's person and home receives the Missouri Constitution's highest level of protection. Self-defense is the core lawful purpose and central component of the right to keep and bear arms in both 2A and Missouri Constitution. See Heller decision. This core lawful purpose includes the right of law-abiding responsible citizens to use arms in defense of hearth and home. The right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental right that is necessary to our system of ordered liberty. See McDonald. He cites Heller and McDonald. He goes on to say the founders viewed the right to keep and bear arms in self-defense as a natural right that was inalienable. This recognition predated the adoption of the U.S. Constitution and had deep roots in English concepts of liberty forged in the Glorious Revolution of 1689. Thus, under principles of English law that the founders viewed as fundamental, the right to keep and bear arms was a recognition of the natural right of defense of one's person or house as part of the law or self-preservation and central to 2A. The founders knew the right to keep and bear arms, not the government, is the citizen's first line of defense against physical attack. Thus, the right received its greatest emphasis during times when government could not be trusted to protect citizens' personal security. The landmark Heller decision mentions its importance for anti-slavery advocates, and post-Civil War firearms for self-defense was often the only way black citizens could protect themselves from mob violence. If anything, this right is even more deeply rooted in Missouri's unique history and tradition. The right was explicitly in Missouri's first Constitution of 1820, stating, the right to bear arms in defense of themselves and of the state cannot be questioned. They've even expanded this language over the years, including in 2014, when the overwhelming majority of Missouri voters included the language, home, person, family, and property, subject to strict scrutiny. It goes on. The state of Missouri shall be obligated to uphold these rights and shall, under no circumstances, decline to protect against their infringement. By enacting the Castle Doctrine of self-defense, Missouri statutes explicitly authorize the use of firearms to defend one's person, family, home, and property from threatening and violent intruders. Missouri has adopted one of the strongest versions of the Castle Doctrine in the country. This doctrine is not merely a creature of statute, but deeply rooted in the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Section 563031 specifically authorizes Missouri citizens and homeowners to protect themselves from illegal invasions and intrusions into their home and private property. It establishes 3 principles. 1, Missourians may defend themselves and others using physical force, including firearms, to deter imminent use of unlawful force by another person. 2, they may use deadly force against a person who has unlawfully entered or attempts to enter private property owned by another and threatens to use unlawful force against another. Missourians have no duty to retreat from their own residence or property when threatened by an unlawful intruder. Very, very wordy, but the gist is this. As outlined by the Attorney General, citing several cases, landmark decisions, and the Constitution, the moment they entered private property, it would seem they could have been shot. That's how strong Missouri's castle doctrine is. The fact that they stood their ground on their own property suggests they broke no laws, which brings me to my main point. Okay, he goes on a lot more, a lot further. There's a lot more to this. He basically says it was a political persecution, ends by saying, on behalf of all Missourians who wish to exercise their right to keep and bear arms in self-defense of their persons, homes, families, and property, and as AG of this great state, I am seeking a dismissal of this politically motivated case at the earliest opportunity and thread. I highlight this to show you, when they say defund the police, they don't really mean it. What they're saying is we want to weaken the forces that would stop us from committing crimes. But given the opportunity to oppress those that we ideologically oppose, we will take it wholeheartedly. 100%. I'd be willing to bet you can follow through on this. Many of the protesters in New York who supported defunding the police probably have posted on Twitter or Facebook that they support the felony charges. I have seen many leftist activists cheer for the felony charges, saying they're crazed gun nuts. Yet at the same time claim the police are overbearing and these overbearing prosecutions must stop. Yes, and there you can see the true hypocrisy. I do not trust them for a minute when they say they want police reform. I actually would like police reform, but not in the way they're doing it. They're causing problems, crime is skyrocketing, and their allies are seeking to persecute and prosecute people they oppose. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at timcast.net, and I will see you all then.